Well, you are asking very interesting questions in light of today's celebrations. I will be fair enough to answer your questions in light of the following, particularly because it's incumbent upon us as a person who works in this nation to be able to provide some substantive answers as far as the International Labour Day is concerned, arguably celebrated every 1st of March. And I want to reiterate your question so that I can be able to lay bare exactly what you're talking about. Your argument is that as we celebrate International Labour Day, we have to be mindful of some of the pressing issues that are affecting us today as a country. And your question was in the context of why is Uganda, particularly its economic growth, not translating into human capital development? For starters, I will be able to answer this question in the following way. Um, it is a paradox, and we must urgently confront this paradox. Uganda's GDP grew by an average of about 5.3% in 2023, for example. But this growth has not translated into meaningful improvement in the well being and the productivity of the people. And why is this the case? Some would argue that because our growth is largely driven by what? By capital, international sectors like oil or even construction and even real estate, for example. But these sectors do not create jobs for the majority of Ugandans. Meanwhile, agriculture, where about 70% of Uganda's workforce actually remains unfunded and under what mechanized and undervalued for that purpose. So there is a dangerous disconnect between national economic planning and the human development priorities. So the argument here being that our human capital index, as per the World Bank, was about 0.38, and this means that Uganda's child born today will only have about 38% of our full production potential, even if they actually complete schools and even they receive healthcare. So yes, we are growing as a country, but we are not growing our people, and this is a silent crisis that we have to address as a nation. Okay, now we have to be mindful that even as we celebrate this question, this Labor Day, we have to celebrate in consonant with some of the challenges. Talk about the education. You asked why is education no longer reliable as far as our unemployment in Uganda is concerned? Because we have a fundamental mismatch between education system and their labor market. And you could argue that Uganda produces about 400,000 40,000 university graduates per year. Yeah, and yet the economy creates fewer than 9,000 formal jobs annually. My point here is that this is not just a gap, it's a crisis. Yeah, and our education system will prioritize theory over practical skills, and that becomes a serious dilemma as well. So students are trained to pass exams and not to solve these problems or even create value in that perspective. And this is something that we need to address as well. So the job market today demands what? Entrepreneurship, for example, or rather than substantive literacy, as it were. But we need craftsmanship and also adaptability. So, but our system is still, giving us degrees that actually employ or even don't create substantive employment opportunities, and therefore this is becoming a serious problem. Take for example, in 2023, UNESCO report found that over 56% of every primary six cannot actually read primary two level of textbooks. Meanwhile, employers continue to complain about the lack of soft skills, ethics, and even critical thinking. So in Uganda today, education is actually producing people who are not competent, in one way or the other. And therefore, I believe that this is causing a rising challenge as far as education and unemployment is concerned in Uganda today. And that is something we also need to comprehend again as a people or as a country for that purpose. Your other question, your third question, was what are the recommendations that Uganda can address as far as unemployment crisis is concerned? Obviously, I'll argue in terms of what they call the three-board action plan in terms of addressing this urgent needed dilemma. First, we must reform our education system. Yes, we need to integrate teachers who can actually, teach technical and even vocational and even digital training, for example, in some of these levels, from primary to university. look at Rwanda and Kenya. They are doing so well as far as the so-called TVET programs is concerned. And about 70% of their graduates are actually employed within 1 year. Second, we must support the informal sector, whereby all over Uganda should be able to have earnable jobs in terms of creating a livelihood for themselves. So this includes reducing unnecessary taxes, for example, providing affordable microloans, for example, and even extending NSSF style protections for informal sectors or informal workers in that perspective. And then number three, we need also to decentralize industrial development. Let's build regional agro-processing, for example, hubs in Busogo, for example, in Lango, in Ankole, in Acholi, targeting groups like coffee, for example, cassava, and even fruits. This can actually absorb thousands of skilled and even semi-skilled youth if managed well. So lastly, we also have to understand that perhaps the most important, but we also must also be able to fight corruption in these so-called job creation programs as well. I would argue that the Audit General's report in 2023, for example, showed that 40% of the funds meant to be, for youth or even for other things like Myoga were actually unaccounted for. And so we cannot talk about jobs while, tolerating the theft of the very resources that are meant to create, to create them in the first place. So the argument here being that the future of Uganda as workforce depends not only on innovation but also on integrity. And this is something we must comprehend again from the word go. And this is something you cannot deny from the word go. So I would like to thank you so much for those questions in light of what you've asked me. Thank you and God bless you.